Your enemies don't want to fight you. They want something far more effective. They want to get inside your head. They provoke you just enough to trigger emotion. They bait you into explaining yourself. They push you to react in public, knowing that the moment you do, you lose status. Most people think power is loud. They think dominance comes from aggression, confidence, or clever comebacks. It doesn't. Real power is psychological. And if someone can control your emotions, they can control your behavior, your reputation, and eventually, your position in the hierarchy. That's why your enemies don't attack your skills. They attack your composure. They want you angry, defensive, off balance. Because reaction is submission. And here's the brutal truth. As long as they can predict your emotional response, they own you mentally. But what if you didn't react? What if, instead of giving them emotion, you gave them nothing? That's where most advice fails, and where this video begins. This is not self-improvement. This is not confidence coaching. And it's definitely not about being fair. You're about to learn 7 Machiavellian strategies designed to erase enemies without confrontation, make manipulators psychologically unstable, and remove your mind from their control permanently. Not by arguing, not by exposing, not by revenge, but by removing your mind from their reach entirely. If you believe everyone deserves fairness, this won't sit right with you. But once you understand these strategies, you'll stop trying to defeat enemies and start making them irrelevant. Watch carefully. This knowledge stayed buried for a reason. Let's begin. The first mistake most people make with enemies is believing the conflict begins when words are exchanged. It doesn't. The conflict begins the moment you react. Reaction is not neutral. Reaction is information. Every emotional response you give, irritation, defense, sarcasm, explanation, teaches your enemy something about you. What touches a nerve, what pressures work, how far they can go next time. This is why enemies repeat the same behavior, not because they enjoy it, because it works. Most people believe reacting is strength. They think silence is weakness. They think not responding means losing. Machiavelli understood the opposite. Reaction hands over the frame. The person who reacts first accepts the role of the responder. They are no longer shaping reality. They are moving inside someone else's agenda. The enemy sets the pace. The enemy sets the topic. The enemy decides when tension rises and falls. This is psychological submission disguised as assertiveness. The first level of mental dominance is not intimidation, it is non-reactivity. When you remove immediate reaction, something uncomfortable happens in the enemy's mind. They lose feedback. Their behavior no longer produces predictable results. The system they were using to control you stops returning data. And without data, they begin to guess. Guessing creates anxiety. Anxiety creates mistakes. Silence is not passive. Silence is pressure without direction. It forces the enemy to fill the gap with their own projections. They replay conversations. They imagine motives. They escalate internally while you remain still. This is why Machiavelli warned against revealing temperament. The man who shows his emotional thresholds makes himself measurable. And what can be measured can be exploited. Removing reaction does not mean becoming soft. It means becoming unreadable. You do not explain. You do not correct. You do not rush to restore balance. You allow imbalance to sit. Most people cannot tolerate this. They feel an urge to clarify, to defend their image, to regain control of how they are perceived. That urge is exactly what enemies rely on. When you resist it, the power dynamic flips. The enemy is now reacting to you, to your silence, to your delay, to your restraint. This is the first fracture in their confidence. They may escalate. They may provoke harder. They may attempt to force a response. That escalation is not danger. It is proof the technique is working. Machiavelli understood that people reveal their dependence on control when it is denied to them. The one who remains calm under provocation becomes the reference point. The one who reacts becomes secondary. This is why the first rule is not attack. It is removal. Remove reaction, and you remove predictability. Remove predictability, and the enemy loses leverage. Lose leverage, and the conflict collapses. Before you defeat an enemy externally, you must make them blind internally. And blindness always begins when reaction disappears. Narratives are not controlled by truth. They are controlled by who refuses to engage. This is the first thing most people misunderstand about psychological warfare. They believe the person who explains best wins. They believe clarity is power. They believe silence creates vulnerability. In reality, the opposite is true. The moment you correct a narrative, you confirm that it matters. And whatever matters can be weaponized. Enemies do not distort your words because they are confused. They distort them because distortion forces response. It creates motion. It pulls you out of position and onto terrain they selected. Machiavelli understood that power never fights on ground chosen by others. It allows others to exhaust themselves defending interpretations that were never acknowledged. This is the trick. When an enemy reshapes your actions into a story that benefits them, you do nothing. You do not clarify. You do not deny. You do not rush to set the record straight. You allow the narrative to exist without confirmation or resistance. Why? Because a narrative without reinforcement is unstable. It requires energy to sustain. And if that energy does not come from you, it must come from the enemy. That burden creates psychological strain. They replay conversations. They analyze your silence. They question whether they miscalculated. The absence of correction introduces uncertainty. And uncertainty is corrosive. Most people cannot tolerate being misunderstood. Their identity depends on accurate reflection. They need to be seen correctly to feel safe. Enemies exploit this instinct relentlessly. They provoke distortions, knowing you will rush in to fix them. The moment you do, three things happen. First, you accept the enemy's framing as legitimate. Second, you reveal your emotional investment. Third, you provide new material for further distortion. You think you are closing the loop. You are feeding it. Silence denies this cycle completely. When you refuse to correct the narrative, the enemy is forced into overproduction. They repeat the story. They embellish it. They escalate the tone. This escalation is not strength. It is compensation. Observers sense it immediately. The one who over-explains appears unstable. The one who remains silent appears anchored. This is not mystery. This is asymmetry. Power is asymmetrical by nature. One side moves, the other does not. One side reacts, the other waits. Machiavelli advised rulers to prioritize outcome over reputation because reputation fluctuates, but consequence endures. The man who chases perception becomes trapped by it. The man who ignores perception forces others to move on. This trick operates on a simple psychological law. What is not acknowledged eventually loses relevance. False narratives collapse when they are not fed, or they metastasize so aggressively that credibility breaks. In both cases, you win without intervention. This does not mean you never speak. It means you speak last, if at all. When you do choose to speak, it is not explanatory. It is declarative. One sentence. No emotional tone. No defense. No attempt to persuade. That contrast, long silence followed by brief clarity, creates authority. Enemies expect panic. They expect rebuttal. They expect engagement. What they cannot handle is a person who does not need to be understood to remain intact. This is why this trick is so destabilizing. It removes their leverage entirely. They cannot escalate without revealing desperation. They cannot retreat without losing the narrative themselves. They cannot control perception without your participation. And you give them none. Control the narrative by refusing to chase it. Control perception by refusing to correct it. Because the person who can live with being misunderstood is no longer manipulable. And the enemy who needs your reaction to stabilize reality has already lost the psychological war. The most effective way to destroy an enemy is not to attack them. It is to remove the pressure that keeps them controlled. Most enemies survive because they are careful. They calculate. They mask intent. The moment you confront them, they tighten discipline. They choose words carefully. They hide behind politeness, plausibility, and denial. Machiavelli understood that direct opposition strengthens an enemy's camouflage. So he did the opposite. He created environments where enemies felt safe enough to expose themselves. This is the trick. You do not accuse. You do not confront. You do not reveal suspicion. You create space. Because people only reveal their true nature when they believe they are unobserved or unthreatened. Enemies are no different. When you remove reaction, remove correction, and remain composed, the enemy begins to misread the situation. They assume dominance. They assume you are unaware. They assume they have won. That assumption is fatal. At this stage, enemies begin to overextend. They talk more. They escalate subtly. They push boundaries publicly. They contradict themselves. Not because they are stupid, but because confidence lowers restraint. Machiavelli wrote that men are most dangerous when restrained, and most vulnerable when relaxed. The enemy who believes he is unopposed abandons discipline. This is when you let them speak. You ask neutral questions. You let silence hang. You allow them to fill it. People cannot tolerate silence when they believe they are in control. They explain, they justify, they embellish. Every sentence adds information. This is not interrogation. It is permission. The enemy begins to reveal motives, insecurities, alliances, resentments. They expose their character through tone, timing, and repetition. Over time, patterns emerge. They say one thing in private and another in public. They claim restraint while escalating. They accuse others of what they themselves are doing. This is projection, and projection is confession. You do not interrupt this process. You document it mentally, because exposure is not about humiliation. It is about positioning. Once an enemy exposes themselves, their credibility erodes quietly. Others begin to notice inconsistencies, trust fractures without you lifting a finger. This is the difference between destruction and dominance. Destruction is loud. Dominance is invisible. Machiavelli understood that reputations are fragile not when attacked, but when allowed to rot under their own contradictions. The enemy who talks too much cannot maintain coherence. The enemy who escalates unnecessarily attracts attention. The enemy who feels safe becomes sloppy. You let this happen. You do not rush the outcome. When the moment arrives, you do not attack the enemy directly. You simply stop shielding them. You allow others to see what you already know. A single fact, a single contradiction, a single moment of restraint from you, while they continue to overreach. That contrast does the work. Observers always side with stability over chaos. The one who remains composed gains authority. The one who exposes desperation loses it. This trick does not require intelligence. It requires patience. Enemies destroy themselves when given enough rope. Your job is not to pull, it is to step back. This is why Machiavelli favored indirect outcomes. The ruler who crushes an enemy openly creates sympathy. The ruler who lets an enemy collapse under their own behavior creates consensus. By the time action is required, the enemy is already isolated. No credibility, no allies, no leverage. They were not defeated. They were revealed. And revelation is irreversible. Time is the one variable enemies cannot control directly. That is why they try to steal it from you. Most psychological pressure is not created by words or threats. It is created by urgency, deadlines, demands, forced decisions, artificial speed. The enemy who controls tempo controls outcomes, because speed collapses judgment. Machiavelli understood that haste is never neutral. It always benefits the side that initiated it. The one who rushes is reacting to pressure. The one who delays is applying it. This trick is not about silence. It is about pace. You decide when things move. You decide when they stop. You decide when nothing happens at all. When an enemy pushes for immediate response, they are not seeking resolution. They are seeking advantage. They want you operating while emotional, incomplete, or unprepared. Speed limits options. Delay multiplies them. So you slow everything down. You do not respond on demand. You do not decide in the moment. You do not resolve tension when it is introduced. You let it sit. The moment you refuse their tempo, the balance shifts. The enemy is now waiting. Waiting produces discomfort. Discomfort produces mistakes. This is not avoidance. This is temporal dominance. When you delay, three things happen inside the enemy's mind. First, certainty collapses. They expected immediacy. Silence or delay creates doubt. They replay the exchange, wondering if they misjudged you, if you noticed something they didn't, if the pressure backfired. Second, imagination turns against them. In the absence of information, the brain invents threats. Your delay becomes strategy in their mind. They attribute intent, planning, and leverage to your stillness, even if you are doing nothing. Third, emotional investment shifts. They carry the tension. You do not. Over time, pressure becomes asymmetrical. The enemy expends energy maintaining urgency while you remain unaffected. Most people cannot tolerate this imbalance. They rush to restore equilibrium. They respond just to clear the air. That response relieves the enemy and restores their control. You do the opposite. You let time work for you. Machiavelli advised rulers never to act under pressure because pressure is manufactured by opponents. Decisions made slowly are rarely exploited. Decisions forced quickly almost always are. This trick requires discipline because it feels unnatural. Social conditioning teaches immediacy as respect, availability as virtue, speed as competence. All three are liabilities in psychological warfare. You must become comfortable with unresolved tension. Delay will be misinterpreted. Silence will be labeled avoidance. Stillness will be tested. You allow those interpretations to exist. Because delay is not passive. It is pressure without direction. Enemies cannot escalate silence effectively. They need engagement to force movement. Without it, they burn energy attempting to restart the clock. Over time, patterns change. People stop demanding instant access. They stop pushing deadlines that benefit only them. They approach more carefully, with better preparation. This is how tempo reshapes behavior without confrontation. When you finally do respond, timing matters more than content. A brief, neutral reply after a long delay carries disproportionate weight. It signals independence from urgency. It ends exchanges rather than extending them. You do not explain. You do not justify. You conclude. That contrast, extended delay followed by decisive closure, establishes authority. Enemies who cannot control tempo cannot control you. This is why delay feels threatening. It denies the emotional payoff they seek. Provocation without immediacy loses potency. Manipulation without urgency loses momentum. You are not ignoring. You are withholding. Withholding creates scarcity. Scarcity increases perceived value. The less available your attention becomes, the more carefully others use it. This trick also stabilizes your internal state. Without constant rapid responses, your nervous system settles. You stop rehearsing conversations that never needed to exist. Clarity replaces agitation. Externally, your presence changes. People describe you as grounded, deliberate, hard to rush. In reality, you are simply not moving on borrowed time. Machiavelli understood that fortune favors those who act deliberately. Speed impresses crowds. Timing controls outcomes. Use time to break rhythm. Use delay to force uncertainty. Use patience to let enemies exhaust themselves. Because the one who controls tempo never has to fight for power. Every enemy operates on assumptions. They assume how you think. They assume how you respond. They assume what you value, what you tolerate, and what you will never do. Those assumptions are their strategy. Machiavelli understood that enemies do not plan against reality. They plan against models. Mental shortcuts built from past behavior, reputation, and pattern recognition. Once those models harden, prediction replaces caution. This is where you strike. You do not fight the enemy directly. You corrupt their expectations. Most people are predictable without realizing it. They escalate when challenged. They retreat when pressured. They compromise when tension rises. Over time, enemies learn the pattern and act accordingly. Predictability is comfort. Comfort breeds recklessness. This trick destroys comfort. You behave normally in small, irrelevant situations. You remain consistent where nothing is at stake. You allow others to believe they have figured you out. Then when it matters, you do the opposite of what is expected. Not emotionally, not theatrically, precisely. Machiavelli warned that consistency builds trust, but selective inconsistency builds power. The goal is not chaos. The goal is miscalculation. Enemies rely on anticipation. They plan provocations expecting anger. They apply pressure expecting retreat. They distort narratives expecting correction. When your response violates their prediction, their internal map collapses. That collapse is dangerous, because decision-making depends on expectation. When expectation fails, hesitation follows. Hesitation opens gaps. This is why expectation reversal must be surgical. You do not change everything. You change one thing, at the decisive moment. An enemy expects escalation. You disengage completely. An enemy expects silence. You intervene decisively. An enemy expects compromise. You enforce a boundary without explanation. The shock is not the action itself. It is the violation of the model. People can adapt to aggression. They can adapt to restraint. They cannot adapt quickly to inconsistency they cannot explain. Machiavelli understood this through warfare and politics. Armies lose not when they are outmatched, but when their expectations fail, when an enemy attacks at the wrong time, retreats when pursuit is expected, or advances when logic predicts defense. Psychological warfare follows the same law. Once you reverse expectations successfully, the enemy enters a state of cognitive instability. They begin questioning previous assumptions. They second-guess future plans. They slow down. This hesitation spreads. Observers sense it. Allies hesitate to align. Support weakens. Momentum stalls. All because the model broke. This is why the trick must be rare. If you reverse expectations constantly, you become chaotic. Chaos is dismissed. Chaos is not trusted. Chaos is managed. Power comes from selective unpredictability. You remain boring most of the time, then decisive once. That single decisive deviation rewrites how others think about you. Enemies begin to overcorrect. They assume you're always capable of the unexpected. They approach cautiously. They test less. They build contingencies for moves you may never make. That mental tax drains them. Meanwhile, you return to consistency. You let them wonder whether the reversal was the new norm or a one-off anomaly. That uncertainty persists. This is how power compounds quietly. Machiavelli advised rulers to cultivate a reputation for restraint, punctuated by decisive severity. Not because severity is desirable, but because uncertainty is paralyzing. Expectation weaponization also protects you. When enemies cannot predict you, they cannot trap you. Traps require timing and assumption. When your behavior no longer fits the expected arc, traps misfire. You are not random. You are opaque. This distinction matters. Randomness is noise. Opacity is control. The enemy should never know which version of you will appear. The silent one, the decisive one, the disengaged one. Only that all versions are possible. That knowledge alone alters behavior. You do not announce this shift. You do not explain it afterward. You let the confusion linger. Because once expectations are unreliable, enemies lose confidence in their own judgment. And the enemy who doubts his judgment hesitates. Hesitation is defeat delayed. Weaponize expectations. Remain predictable where it costs nothing. Become unpredictable where it costs them everything. Because the enemy who cannot anticipate you is already reacting to you. Most people think conflict ends when someone wins. Machiavelli knew that was wrong. Conflict ends when one mind cannot resolve what happened. Enemies don't break when they lose an argument. They break when they never understand why they lost relevance, access, or control. This is the trick that moral systems warn you about. Because it works too well. Human beings are addicted to closure. They need explanations, endings, moral accounting. When something breaks without explanation, the mind loops endlessly trying to repair it. That loop is a prison. This trick weaponizes that need. You do not confront the enemy. You do not explain your withdrawal. You do not clarify intentions. You simply change behavior, cleanly, quietly, without ceremony. One day access is there, the next day it isn't. No argument, no announcement, no emotional justification. The enemy will assume something happened. They will replay every interaction. They will search for the moment they lost you. They will invent reasons, insults, slights, imagined betrayals, and none of them will be confirmed. Machiavelli understood that uncertainty is more corrosive than punishment. Punishment ends suffering. Uncertainty multiplies it. This is why closure must be denied completely. You do not give them a final conversation. You do not give them feedback. You do not give them a chance to apologize, explain, or correct. Because closure allows healing, and healing restores strength. Denying closure keeps the psychological wound active. The enemy becomes obsessed, not with you, but with the gap you left behind. The unanswered question becomes louder than any insult ever could. What did I do wrong? Was it intentional? Did they see through me? Was I misjudged? Am I irrelevant? These questions loop without resolution. The mind cannot move forward without narrative coherence. When coherence is denied, attention collapses inward. Focus degrades. Confidence erodes. Externally, the enemy may appear functional. Internally, they are fragmented. This is not revenge. This is psychological extraction. Machiavelli hinted at this when he warned that men fear uncertainty more than loss. Loss is measurable. Uncertainty is infinite. Here is the critical rule. Once you deny closure, you never reopen the door. Even neutral engagement later destroys the effect. Even kindness resets the loop. Even acknowledgement gives the mind something to work with. Silence must be absolute, not hostile silence, not dramatic silence. Indifferent silence. Indifference is the most destabilizing signal a human mind can receive. Anger means importance. Hatred means engagement. Indifference means non-existence. Enemies can fight anger. They can rationalize hatred. They cannot process indifference. Over time, the enemy may attempt indirect contact, mutual connections, casual messages, checking in. These are not reconciliation attempts. They are closure-seeking behaviors. You deny all of them. You do not reject. You do not respond. You do not acknowledge. Eventually, the mind begins to fracture its own narrative. Self-blame alternates with self-justification. Confidence oscillates. Identity weakens. This is why this trick is considered unethical. Because it does not attack behavior, it attacks meaning. Machiavelli understood that meaning is what stabilizes power. Remove meaning, and even strong personalities decay. This trick does not require confrontation, exposure, or dominance displays. It requires discipline and emotional neutrality. You walk away without explanation. You never look back. You let the unanswered question do the work. By the time the enemy regains internal stability, if they ever do, you are already irrelevant to their life. And that is the final inversion. They tried to control you. Instead, you became the unresolved variable in their mind, a problem with no solution, a question with no answer, a wound with no closing. This is why the trick feels forbidden, because once used correctly, it cannot be undone. And the enemy never recovers the version of themselves that existed before the uncertainty began. Every conflict ends the same way. Not when someone wins, not when someone apologizes, but when one side becomes impossible to affect. Machiavelli understood this better than anyone. He did not aim to defeat enemies one by one. He aimed to reach a position where enemies no longer mattered. This is that position. Psychological untouchability is not dominance. It is inaccessibility. At this level, enemies can speak, act, distort, escalate, and nothing reaches you in a way that alters behavior, emotion, or trajectory. Their presence no longer changes your decisions. This is not indifference born from weakness. It is indifference born from structural superiority. Most people remain vulnerable because their identity is still exposed. They need validation, recognition, fairness, acknowledgement, resolution. Each need is a handle. Each handle can be pulled. Machiavelli warned that the man who needs nothing cannot be threatened. This trick removes the final needs. You stop requiring understanding, agreement, closure, vindication, emotional symmetry. You do not replace these needs with hardness. You replace them with self-contained meaning. This is where most people fail. They think power is external. Status, control, reputation, influence. Those are all secondary. They fluctuate. Untouchability comes from internal finality. Your values are settled. Your direction is decided. Your identity is not up for negotiation. At this stage, Enemies face a paradox. They can no longer provoke you, because provocation requires emotional hooks. They can no longer threaten you, because threats require leverage. They can no longer distort you, because perception no longer dictates action. Everything they try produces nothing. This emptiness is destabilizing. Humans are wired for response. When actions no longer generate effects, the mind spirals. Enemies escalate, not because they gain power, but because they lose it. Machiavelli observed that men grow violent when they lose relevance. They prefer resistance over irrelevance. Resistance proves they still matter. You deny them even that. You do not react. You do not counter. You do not perform restraint theatrically. You simply continue forward, unchanged. This is why untouchability cannot be faked. If you are pretending not to care, enemies sense it. If you are suppressing emotion, pressure finds cracks. Untouchability is not suppression. It is resolution. You have already decided who you are, where you are going, and what is non-negotiable. Everything else becomes noise. At this level, conflict becomes informational rather than emotional. You observe behavior without absorbing it. You register moves without responding automatically. You treat hostility like weather, noted but not personalized. This creates a terrifying asymmetry. The enemy is still fighting you. You are no longer fighting them. That gap widens over time. They define themselves in opposition to you. You do not define yourself in relation to them at all. Machiavelli understood that this is the highest form of power. When others organize their behavior around you, while you remain self-directed. Eventually, the enemy faces three options. Escalate further, which exposes desperation. Withdraw, which concedes influence. Obsess, which destroys them internally. All outcomes favor you. This is why this state feels unreachable to most people. It requires killing a subtle addiction, the need to win visibly. Untouchable individuals do not need witnesses. They do not need acknowledgement. They do not need the enemy to know they lost. They have already exited the game. This is the final Machiavellian inversion. Power is not having enemies beneath you. Power is having enemies irrelevant to you. Once you reach this state, the previous tricks become automatic. You don't remove reaction. There is nothing to react to. You don't control narratives. They don't affect movement. You don't expose enemies. They expose themselves. You don't manage time. Urgency can't reach you. You don't weaponize expectations. No one can predict what no longer depends on them. You are no longer responding. You are operating. This is why Machiavelli was feared. Not because he taught cruelty, but because he taught detachment with direction. The untouchable individual is not cold. They are complete, and completeness is invulnerable. Enemies cannot defeat what they cannot reach. They cannot manipulate what does not need them. They cannot threaten what has already decided its path. This is not the end of conflict. It is the end of vulnerability. And once reached, there is no returning to the old version of you, because the mind that no longer needs permission cannot be ruled again.